Welcome back to Chalkline Crime in this educational video. Before we get started, we ask if you like our content to please like and subscribe, as it greatly helps grow this channel, and don't forget to jingle that bell icon to get notified every time we drop a new video. Now, without further ado, Chalkline Crime presents episode 3 of Women That Kill Serial Killers. In our first case, we travel to California, where we ask the question, ever wonder what could possibly drive a grandmotherly figure to commit the most heinous of crimes? Picture a kind elderly woman, Dorethea Puente, who on the surface seemed as ordinary as they come. But beneath that deceptive exterior lurked a chilling secret. This seemingly harmless woman was responsible for a series of horrifying crimes that would send shockwaves across the nation. Who exactly was Dorethea Puente, and how did she become a notorious serial killer? Stay with us as we unravel her chilling story. Born in 1929, Dorothea's early life gave little indication of the horrors that were to follow. In the heart of California, she was born to Trudy and Jesse Gray. Her childhood, however, was far from idyllic. Both parents were alcoholics, and by the age of 8, she was orphaned and sent to live in an orphanage. The years that followed were filled with uncertainty and hardship. From an early age, Dorothea learned how to fend for herself, a trait that would serve her well, or rather ill, in the years to come. She married for the first time at just 16 to a man much older than herself. This relationship, however, was short-lived and marked by violence. In her early 20s, she moved to San Francisco. This city, known for its vibrant culture and burgeoning opportunities, seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. Dorothea, however, was drawn to the underbelly of the city, engaging in petty crimes and fraud to support herself. In the midst of this, Dorothea showed a surprising knack for caretaking. She often took in those who had nowhere else to go, providing them with a roof over their heads, food on their plates, and a sense of community. This act of kindness, however, had a sinister undercurrent. Dorothea was not just providing for these people out of the goodness of her heart. She was establishing a power dynamic, one that she would later exploit to horrifying ends. As she navigated her way through life's trials and tribulations, there were flashes of the woman Dorothea would become. A troubled childhood, a propensity for deception, and a twisted sense of compassion all combined to create a dangerous cocktail. But at this point, these were just whispers of the storm that was brewing. Dorothea's early life was a study in contradictions. A woman who could be both nurturing and manipulative, kind and cruel, seemingly ordinary yet deeply disturbed. As she grew older, these contradictions would become more pronounced, culminating in a reign of terror that would shock the world. But life was about to take a dark turn for Dorethea Puente. In the 1980s, Dorothea opened a boarding house, a safe haven for the elderly and disabled, or so it seemed. Nestled in the heart of Sacramento, California, it was an unassuming Victorian-style home, a beacon of hope for those who had nowhere else to turn, a place where they could find comfort in their twilight years. The residents, a hodgepodge of society's forgotten souls, were drawn by Dorothea's seemingly kind demeanor and the promise of a safe space. This boarding house, however, was more than meets the eye. On the surface, it was a sanctuary for the downtrodden, but beneath this facade of safety and care, a sinister operation was brewing. Dorothea, the kind-hearted landlady in the eyes of many, was orchestrating a web of deceit and horror that would shock the world. She welcomed her tenants with open arms, their vulnerability making them easy targets. Many of them were estranged from their families, their loneliness a haunting melody that echoed through the creaky corridors of the boarding house. However, behind the closed doors of this house of supposed refuge, things were far from peaceful. Residents began to disappear, leaving behind no trace, their absence explained away by Dorothea's plausible stories. She spoke of them finding new homes, reconnecting with distant relatives, or simply deciding to move on, and people believed her. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the pattern of disappearances became impossible to ignore. Whispers of concern began to circulate, the seeds of suspicion taking root. The boarding house, once a beacon of hope, was now shrouded in a cloak of dread and unease. Yet for the residents still living within its walls, the truth was far from their grasp. They continued to see Dorothea as their protector, oblivious to the grim fate that had befallen their former housemates and the chilling destiny that awaited them. Little did the residents know, their haven was about to turn into a living nightmare. In 1988, the boarding house's garden, Once a place of tranquility became a gruesome crime scene. The garden, once brimming with vibrant flowers and the occasional hummingbird, now held a ghastly secret. It was in this very place, beneath the rich soil, that the first of 7 bodies was unearthed. A social worker's persistent inquiries about a missing tenant had led the police to Dorethea Puente's boarding house, but the horror they stumbled upon was far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The investigation kicked into high gear. Each body, each piece of evidence was meticulously examined, creating a chilling tapestry of deception and death. Dorethea, the seemingly sweet landlady, became a suspect. It was a shock to the community, a jarring juxtaposition to the image they had of her. She had been seen as a charitable woman, providing a home for the less fortunate, but beneath this facade, it seemed, lurked a monster. The community was in disbelief. The whispers grew louder, the rumors more unsettling. How could Dorethea, the woman who had served homemade meals to her tenants, be capable of such heinous acts? The evidence, however, was undeniable. The bodies had been found in her garden, and the missing tenants had last been seen in her company. Bits and pieces of Dorothea's dark past started to surface. Prior convictions for theft, forgery, and even drugging her tenants to steal their benefits checks. But murder? It was a leap that many found hard to comprehend. Yet the bodies in the garden told a different story. A story of a woman who had used her boarding house not as a sanctuary, but as a hunting ground. The shockwaves from this discovery rippled far beyond Dorothea's boarding house. It reached into the heart of the community, shattering their sense of safety and trust. It was a chilling reminder that evil could lurk where you least expect it, hidden behind the most benign of facades. And just like that, Dorethea Puente went from a kind landlady to a murder suspect. As the trial unfolded, the horrifying extent of Dorothea's crimes came to light. The courtroom was a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. The bodies found at the boarding house, personal items of the deceased discovered in Dorothea's possession, and testimonies from surviving boarders describing unusual behavior and missing companions. The evidence painted a chilling portrait of the quiet, elderly woman who once was a respected member of the community. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Dorethea was a victim herself, manipulated by her tenant and accomplice, who they claimed was the real culprit. Dorethea, throughout the trial, maintained her innocence with an eerie calm, denying any involvement in the murders. Witnesses took the stand, their voices echoing in the silent courtroom. Former boarders, neighbors, even a social worker who had referred clients to Dorothea's boarding house. Their testimonies added layers to the grim narrative. One particularly haunting testimony came from a former tenant who spoke of strange odors and nightly digging sounds, adding a palpable sense of dread to the unfolding story. Yet it was the forensic evidence, the bodies, the toxicology reports indicating lethal doses of prescription drugs, that proved most damning. The jury deliberated and returned with their verdict, guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The aftermath was a surreal spectacle. Dorethea Puente, the elderly boarding house owner, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She spent the remainder of her days in the Central California Women's Facility, where she passed away in March of 2011. Throughout her time in prison, Dorethea never admitted to the crimes she was convicted of. She maintained her innocence until the end, a chilling reminder of the depths of human deceit and the darkness that can lurk beneath a facade of respectability. Dorethea Puente, once a respected member of the community, was now a convicted serial killer. Dorethea Puente's story serves as a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk beneath the surface. A kindly old woman on the outside, she was a predator, exploiting the most vulnerable in society for her own gain. Her name lives on in infamy, a chilling tale of deception and murder in a Sacramento boarding house. Her grim legacy is one of shattered lives and broken trust. The families of her victims, many of whom were homeless or estranged from their kin, were left grappling with the shock and horror of their loved ones' untimely ends. Their grief was compounded by the shocking betrayal from a woman who was supposed to provide a safe haven for their vulnerable kin. The community was also deeply affected. Sacramento, a city known for its warm and welcoming spirit, was left reeling from the revelations. The sense of security and trust was shattered, replaced by fear and suspicion. In the wake of this gruesome saga, there were calls for stricter regulations for boarding houses and residential care facilities. The tragic events highlighted the need for better oversight and protection. for the vulnerable individuals residing in such establishments. As a result, more stringent laws were put in place, aiming to prevent a repeat of such a horrifying incident. But the memories still linger, a haunting reminder of the dark side of human nature. Dorethea Puente, a name that will forever be associated with a heinous betrayal of trust. In our second case, we travel to the shadowy fringes of Mexico City, where a story unfolds that would send chills down the spine of even the most hardened true crime enthusiast. Our narrative begins with Juana Barraza, a name that would later echo in the annals of criminal history. Yet Juana was not born a monster, but a child, an innocent soul. The early stages of her life were not filled with the warmth of love or the comfort of a nurturing environment. Instead, they were saturated with hardship, abuse, and neglect. Born into poverty in the late 1950s, Juana's childhood was anything but idyllic. Her mother, reportedly an alcoholic, traded her daughter's innocence for a few bottles of beer to a man who had no right to take it. This traumatic experience, a gross betrayal by the very person meant to protect her, was the first of many that would mar Juana's early years. The love and support that should have been her safety net were glaringly absent. Instead, Juana found herself navigating a tumultuous sea of abuse and neglect with no beacon of hope or solace in sight. Home, a place meant to be a sanctuary, became a battlefield where she fought daily for her dignity and survival. Her adolescence, much like her childhood, was a continual struggle. The absence of a supportive, loving environment only intensified the hardship she faced. The lack of guidance and the constant exposure to violence and exploitation undoubtedly left deep scars on her psyche. As she grew older, these experiences began to shape her, molding her into a person hardened by the harsh realities of her existence. The innocent child was slowly being chiseled away, replaced by a shell hardened by life's cruel blows. An innocent child, born into a world of cruelty and neglect, was slowly shaped into something much more sinister. This was the chilling beginning, the genesis of a life that would take a dark and terrifying turn, casting a long and ominous shadow over the bustling streets of Mexico City. As time wore on, Juana Barraza's life took a turn for the worse. A gentle soul once filled with dreams and hopes, Juana found herself spiraling down a path of darkness that no one could have ever anticipated. In the early stages, signs of her impending doom were subtle, almost imperceptible. Her relationships began to crack and crumble like dry earth under a blazing sun. Friends and lovers alike found themselves distanced, pushed away by an invisible force. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the Juana they knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger wearing her face. Her isolation grew, a self-imposed exile from the world that only served to further her descent. The silence of solitude can be deafening, and for Juana it screamed louder than any crowd. As her connections to the outside world dwindled, her inner demons began to grow louder, more assertive. But it wasn't just the growing isolation that was alarming. It was the flashes of violence that began to seep through the cracks. A sudden outburst here, an unprovoked aggression there. They were the first inklings of a storm brewing within her, a tempest of rage and despair that was slowly taking over. At first, these violent tendencies were dismissed as mere fits of anger, the stress of a hard life manifesting in bursts of temper. But as time went on, those around her began to see the truth. This wasn't just frustration. This was something much more sinister. Her life was no longer a series of unfortunate events, but a jigsaw puzzle of darkness and despair, each piece fitting perfectly into the next, forming a chilling picture of a woman on the brink. A woman teetering on the edge of an abyss so deep and dark, it threatened to consume her whole. One could only guess the horrors that were to come. The transformation was complete. The storm within had taken over, and the world was about to bear witness to the birth of a terror unlike any it had seen before. In the heart of Mexico City, a grim specter began to emerge. As the sun set on the vibrant streets, an unseen horror started its reign. Juana Barraza, a woman who had known only hardship and pain, began a chilling journey into darkness. Her victims were not chosen at random. No, Juana had a specific target: elderly, vulnerable women who lived alone. She would approach them under the guise of a government worker or a nurse offering help, only to exploit their trust in the most horrific way. The city's most fragile residents became prey to a predator that looked just like one of their own. Juana's modus operandi was as cruel as it was calculated. She would strangle her victims with items found within their own homes, leaving behind a scene that was both chaotic and eerily personal. Each crime scene was a chilling tableau, a grim testament to the life that had been brutally extinguished. As the body count grew, so did the fear. It slithered through the city's streets, seeping into every home. The elderly, once revered and protected, now felt targeted and alone. The city's heartbeat became a trembling whisper, its vibrant life stifled by the shadow of the Mataviejitas, or the little old lady killer. Rumors swirled, theories abounded, but the truth remained elusive. The killer was among them, yet unseen, blending seamlessly into the fabric of their everyday lives. This wasn't a monster lurking in the shadows, this was a woman, a neighbor, someone who could be passing you on the street. Yet beneath the veil of normalcy, a darkness thrived. Juana Barraza, a woman born of hardship, had become something else entirely. A specter of death, a silent predator, she moved through the city unnoticed, leaving in her wake a trail of terror and sorrow. The silent predator was on the prowl, and the city lived in fear. The birth of a killer had brought forth a reign of terror, and the heart of Mexico City beat with a chilling dread. The killings continued, each more chilling than the last. As Juana Barraza's reign of terror unfolded, her crimes grew more audacious. Her victims were older women, often living alone, who'd open their doors to a stranger offering help or company. Unknown to them, they were welcoming death. One of Barraza's most egregious cases involved a 72-year-old woman. Barraza had strangled her with a stethoscope, a chilling twist to her already brutal modus operandi. In another instance, she bludgeoned an 82-year-old woman with a statue, leaving her lifeless body as a testament to her cruelty. Public reaction was a mix of fear and disbelief. How could a woman be responsible for such heinous acts? The police too were baffled. The evidence pointed towards a female perpetrator, but it was hard to reconcile with the violent nature of the crimes. The investigation was like trying to complete a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. The media played a significant role in amplifying the fear. The press gave Barraza a nickname that would send shivers down the spine of Mexico City, the Old Lady Killer. The moniker painted a horrifying picture, a predatory figure preying on the most vulnerable, leaving a trail of devastation in her wake. But the media did more than just spread fear. They also played a crucial role in keeping the story alive, ensuring that the authorities didn't forget the victims. The constant coverage put pressure on the police to solve the case, turning up the heat on an investigation that seemed to be going nowhere. Despite the mounting fear and the increased scrutiny, Barraza remained elusive. She was a phantom, slipping in and out of people's lives, leaving destruction in her path. The police were on high alert, the public was terrified, and the media was in a frenzy. But for all the fear and chaos, one thing was clear: the reign of terror was far from over. But even the darkest tales have an ending. The city of Mexico, once paralyzed by fear, breathed a sigh of relief as the reign of terror was finally brought to an end. The woman at the heart of it all, Juana Barraza, was apprehended, and the gruesome tale began to unravel. It was January of 2006. An unsuspecting Juana was arrested after a witness spotted her leaving the house of her final victim. Her capture sparked a wave of shock and disbelief across the city. The faceless terror that had been stalking the elderly for years was, in fact, a woman, a mother, a wrestling enthusiast who went by the ring name of the Silent Lady. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media circus. Every detail of her life and crimes was scrutinized, dissected, and laid bare for all to see. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of a remorseless predator who preyed on the most vulnerable. The defense, on the other hand, pointed to her troubled childhood, arguing that she was a victim of her circumstances. But the jury was unmoved. Juana Barraza was found guilty and sentenced to 759 years in prison. Her conviction sent ripples far beyond the courtroom. The public grappled with the reality of the woman behind the terror. Many struggled to reconcile the image of the ruthless killer with the ordinary woman who lived among them. The victims' families, meanwhile, found little solace in her conviction. The scars left by her heinous crimes were too deep to be healed by mere justice. And so the city was left to pick up the pieces, to mourn the lives lost, to grapple with the senseless brutality, and to ask the question, how could such a thing happen here? Juana Barraza, the woman behind the terror, was finally unmasked. The tale of Juana Barraza is as chilling as they come. In the aftermath of her brutal crimes, a chilling silence descended, leaving in its wake a legacy of fear and sorrow. The community she once called home was forever marked, etched with the scars of her actions. Yet Juana's story continues to resonate, capturing the morbid fascination of true crime enthusiasts around the globe. Her narrative, grim as it may be, serves as a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity and the capacity for evil that lies within us all. The lessons learned from Juana's reign of terror are profound. They force us to confront the unsettling reality that monsters do exist, not in the shadows or under the bed, but in the light of day walking among us, hidden in plain sight. In the end, the story of Juana Barraza serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places.